They threw rotten food at fat girl in town square. Mountain Man stopped them, but she followed him. Make her crawl for the crowd. Let the pig earn her slop. Garrett Blackwell jeered into the Harvest Festival megaphone, while his twin Gideon yanked a painted wooden mask over Patsy Whitmore's head until the straps bit her throat. The plaza of Ashford Creek roared. Applause, tin cups clanging, a fiddle laughing off-key, because cruelty is easier than conscience when everyone is watching. Patsy's wrists were tied behind her, the mask's snout fogged with her breath. "Squeal for us!" someone shouted. Rotten apples flew. A boy kicked her shin and ran. They had built a trench of slurry in the square, mud, hogwash, and the day's scraps skimmed from troughs behind the stockyards. Our grand finale, the mayor, Cornelius Blackwell, father to the twins, announced from the bunting-draped stand, a celebration of industry and humor. He smiled, and the crowd took their permission from that smile. Gideon shoved Patsy to her knees at the edge of the pit. Her dress, already patched a dozen times from chores at the pens, soaked through in a single breath as the cold rose into her bones. "Crawl, piggy," Garrett said, tapping the back of her head with a cane. "Show us what you really are." Patsy tasted brine and ash beneath the mask. The wood stank of paint and someone else's laughter. She tried to pull air, but the straps held. She had spent years swallowing insults in private. Today, the town wanted them eaten in public. She folded forward and moved an inch, then another, knees carving tracks, the filth climbing her sleeves. "Slower," Gideon drawled. "We want our money's worth." A woman near the cider stall snickered, turned to whisper. A man tossed a handful of chicken bones. One stuck to the mask's wet snout as if to prove a point. "Enough!" someone cried from the fringes, but the word fell like a pebble into a river and was carried away. Patsy's breath shortened into hot knives. She coughed inside wood and darkness. The mask clapped the sound back at her. The world narrowed to three things: the burning in her lungs, the throb of rope on her wrists, the memory of morning she'd cleaned pens before dawn and told herself dignity was something you kept on the inside. Another kick. Laughter layered on laughter until it sounded like weather. Then the weather changed. A shadow stepped off the freight wagon line and crossed the square without asking permission. He was taller than the mayor's lectern, shoulders like a split-rail fence, hair unfussed by a barber. Since last winter, he didn't shout. He moved. Gideon's cane rose, then vanished, crushed in the stranger's palm with a dry snap. With his other hand, he lifted the pig mask by the snout and sheared the strap with a knife as plain and honest as iron. Cool air touched Patsy's face. She gulped it like water. Garrett reached for his pistol. The stranger stared, and Garrett forgot what his hand was doing. "Get your knees off her dignity," the man said, voice low enough to make silence contagious. Mayor Blackwell found words about order and jurisdiction. The stranger didn't bother to look up. He gathered Patsy as if the world had weight and he had chosen to carry it. "Name's Eli," he told her alone. "You're done crawling." Ashford Creek wore respectability like a Sunday coat, pressed, perfumed, and threadbare at the elbows if you looked too close. Freight wagons rattled past the grist mill that never quite paid its debts. The church bell rang on time, though the pastor's roof leaked. People said "ma'am" and "sir" while pricing one another by land, last names, and the shine on their boots. Patsy Whitmore knew every corner of it from the ground up. She rose before light to muck the pig pens behind Coulter's feed and grain, hauling slops till her shoulders burned. Her palms were a map of healed blisters. She was 24, wide-hipped and soft in the middle, with a jaw that set when men smiled the wrong way. She kept her hair braided and her eyes down, because in a town that loved a show, invisibility was its own form of armor, until the day they ripped it off her face and called it entertainment. When Eli cut the mask and air found her, the square seemed to tilt, noise washing back in cold waves. The twins regrouped behind Bluster. "That woman," Garrett shouted, pointing with a trembling finger he tried to hide, "belongs to the festival. Step aside or the law will—" "Law," Eli said, more to himself than to Garrett, as if turning over the shape of the word in his mouth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need the crowd. He needed only his certainty. He lowered Patsy gently, shrugging out of his coat and settling it around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of pine pitch and smoke. The weight steadied her. He sliced the rope at her wrists. Feeling returned in painful pins. She curled her fingers, and mud cracked from her knuckles like old shell. Mayor Blackwell climbed down from the platform with the precise care of a man who thought every step was an audience. He smoothed his lapel. "Sir, you are from away and therefore ignorant of our customs. The young lady volunteers annually to amuse our citizens. We are a hard-working town. We value laughter. We value order." Patsy swayed. "That's a lie," she said, voice raw but audible. "I never volunteered a day in my life." Eli's eyes slid to the mayor, gray as stormlight. They carried none of the fidget that choked the square. "You done?" he asked. The mayor, unused to endings not of his own invention, opened and closed his mouth without sound. Eli turned to leave with Patsy, but Gideon blocked the way, anger trying to fill the space courage had vacated. "You don't just take property," Gideon spat. Eli looked where Gideon pointed, and all that lay there was Patsy. "She isn't what you say she is," Eli answered. "And even if she were a thing on a ledger, you set the price when you said festival. What's your number, merchant sons?" The twins blinked at a language they usually only spoke in secret. Value. $50, Garrett gambled, thinking no stranger carried that much in town. Eli's jaw flexed. He studied Patsy, not her mud, not her torn sleeves, but the stubborn lift of her chin against shame. He set her on her feet, slipped a hand into an inside pocket of the coat now warming her shoulders, and brought out a buckskin roll. He counted aloud, because some men only hear math when it stings. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. The bills hit the mayor's palm one by one like decisions. "No tricks," Eli said. "No IOUs. Paid public, for the sake of your public. You wanted a show. Let it end on purchase." The square murmured, that hungry animal unsure whether to hiss or purr. The mayor tried for dignity. "You can't buy a person." "You tried," Eli said. "I'm buying her freedom to walk out of here without being dragged back. If your mouth wants to find a law now, go dig one up where it was when they tied her hands." Silence rearranged itself. Surprise curdled into something complicated in a few faces. Shame softened others. A woman from the cider stall set down her cup. A boy who had thrown a bone stared at his shoes long enough to see the mud on them did not wash off with pride. Eli offered his arm. Patsy blinked at it, at the rough hair on the wrist and the healed nicks from knives and winters. She took it because her leg still trembled and because the gesture was the first honest thing the afternoon had given her. The pair moved. The crowd parted in that particular way crowds do when confronted with a mirror, some shrinking, some pretending to be somewhere else, some stepping aside because space had become a kind of apology. At the edge of the square, Patsy paused. She turned and searched the faces until she found a girl from the laundry with chapped hands and a gaze like a trapped bird. Patsy held that gaze long enough to say without saying, "I see you. Get out when you can." Then she faced forward again. Eli did not hurry her. He matched the pace of someone rebuilding the shape of her body inside her bones. They reached the pump behind the livery. Eli worked the handle. Water came up iron cold. "Rinse what they put on you," he said, and stood just far enough away to give her privacy without surrendering the perimeter. Patsy scrubbed her hair, her cheeks, the thin red ring the strap had burned into her neck. Mud bled into the dust at their feet. The coat weighed new now, less burden, more shelter. "Why did you help me?" she asked without looking up. He answered after the water had stilled. "Because I've seen men lose their faces and call it a holiday. Because I've lost things I can't buy back. Because you were drowning in the middle of a drought and nobody thought to bring a bucket." "Are you a sheriff?" She didn't know what kind of man carried his own gravity. "No." He lifted his eyes toward the mountain line that kept its own counsel. "I trap and hunt and keep to myself. I go by Eli when anyone needs a name." "Then why risk this?" She gestured toward the square, to the murmurs that still fluttered like pages in a wind. "I don't carry a ledger for that kind of arithmetic." He tore a strip from a clean cloth, handed it to her. "Tie your hair. It's cold on the ridge." There it was, the ridge. The thought of the cabins above timberline, of air that hurt to breathe but never stank of other people's approval. Patsy knotted her hair and tested the shape of a question on her tongue. It wasn't the old kind, "May I stay? Please like me?" She had learned in one ugly afternoon that begging taught wolves to circle. The question rose anyway, softer, because it had courage in it. "Take me with you," she said, "not as debt, not as pity. I'll carry my weight. I already know how." He didn't answer. He hitched his pack and walked her to the hitch rail, where a bay gelding dozed with the patience of a creature used to long work. He checked the cinch and talked to the horse the way some men talk to God. His silence felt less like refusal than like a man weighing a trail in his head. The switchbacks, the sudden storms, the way grief warped a floorboard you'd step through if you weren't careful. He helped her up behind the saddle. The warmth of the horse climbed into her thighs. He mounted, and they turned toward the road that threaded between cottonwoods and out into land that preferred honesty. They rode past the mill. The foreman looked away. They passed the church. The pastor's wife stared, then made the small sign mothers make when a child startles, maybe a blessing, maybe a memory of who she meant to be. At the last clapboard house, an old man on a stoop lifted 2 fingers from his hat. Eli tipped his chin back. A language made of fewer words and more truth moved between them. At the bridge, Patsy looked over her shoulder. The square was a smear now, bunting dull in the distance. She expected triumph and felt something heavier, like leaving your name scratched under a school desk you never intended to sit at again. "They'll come," she said. "The twins, the mayor, men who don't like watching power walk away." "They might," Eli said. "Let them learn country that won't clap for them." Wind came down from snowfields clean and sharp. The coat's collar rose under her chin. She breathed and didn't taste wood or paint. She let the breath go and found another beneath it that wasn't shaped by anyone's laughter. Behind the questions crowding her mind, what winter did to hands, how far the ridge really was, whether the night had wolves, something else unfolded, a small, stubborn belief that the world contained rooms she had not been allowed to imagine. At the foot of the first climb, Eli slowed. "There's a line," he said, eyes still on the grade. "Town on one side, mountain on the other. I can cross it without asking. If you cross it, you cross because you choose, and because you understand mountain keeps what it's given. No halfway. No return to beg permission from men who'd rather throw bones." Patsy's fingers tightened in the coat. She thought of the laundry girl's eyes, of her own reflection in the wash water on mornings when she pretended not to cry. She thought of the mask and the moment it left her face like a window opening. "I choose," she said. Eli nodded once, as if confirming a fact to himself. "Then hold on." He touched his heel to the gelding's flank, and the climb began, hooves biting, breath steaming. The town fell behind like a story half told by a bad narrator. The mountain opened ahead, honest as hunger and twice as demanding. The trail to the high country began as a wagon road, rutted and half frozen, but before long it narrowed into a ribbon of earth climbing through pines that whispered of older laws. The air sharpened. The laughter and lies of Ashford Creek thinned behind them until only wind spoke. Every mile felt like peeling away skin that never fit. Patsy clung to the saddle horn, her legs trembling from work she had never done. Mud flaked dry on her dress. Eli's coat, heavy with the scent of campfire, wrapped her shoulders. The horse's gait rocked her like a heartbeat she was learning to trust. When her breath caught, Eli's voice came over his shoulder, low, unhurried. "Lean with him, not against. Mountain doesn't like to be fought." She tried. The motion steadied. Between jolts she caught flashes. Elk tracks pressed in thawing snow, a hawk hanging still against the gray, a stream that cut through granite like a thread of glass. All of it seemed impossibly clean, as if the world had been washed while she wasn't looking. "Does anyone live up here?" she asked when her voice returned. "Cougars, some trappers east of the ridge, a preacher who drinks too much and forgets sermons, and me." He didn't glance back. His tone wasn't boast or warning. It was simple geography. "You don't miss people?" "Not the kind who cheer at cruelty." The answer landed between them like truth too plain for echo. Patsy turned it over in her head. Maybe solitude wasn't punishment if you chose it. By dusk, they reached a meadow hemmed in by black timber. Eli dismounted and lifted her down before she could protest. His hands were calloused, but careful, as if aware how easily bone bruised beneath softness. "We camp here," he said. "Firewood first." She followed his gestures. How to strip bark dry enough to catch, how to angle logs so smoke rose straight. Her fingers fumbled, numb from cold, but pride kept her silent. When the first spark took, she gasped. The flame answered with a low, steady hum. Eli nodded once. "Good." He unpacked salt pork, biscuits hard as stones, and a tin of coffee. They ate beside the fire, the sky bruising into night. When he poured her a cup, his hand shook only slightly from chill. "You'll sleep there?" he said, pointing to a spread of pine boughs under a tarp. "I'll keep watch." From what? Storm, bear, memory. She studied him in the firelight, jaw rough with dark stubble, eyes distant but not unkind. Memory's the worst of those, isn't it? He didn't answer. Silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of sap. Patsy pulled the coat tighter and lay down. The ground was hard, but exhaustion ran deeper. She drifted to the rhythm of wind sighing through needles and the faint, protective creak of Eli shifting the logs. Morning came silver and thin. Frost rimed her hair. Eli was already moving, tying bundles, checking traps he'd set in the dark. When he saw her stir, he tossed a strip of jerky her way. "Eat while it's quiet," he said. "Noise carries downhill." They rode again, higher. The world turned to rock and snow. She learned not to talk when her breath smoked white, learned that hunger felt different in clean air. Once she slipped crossing an icy stream. Eli caught her wrist before she fell. For a second, their faces were close enough that she saw his eyes weren't cold. They were tired, like water that had run too far. "Thank you," she said. He grunted. "Don't thank a man for doing what's right." They pressed on. Around noon, a storm rolled over the ridge. Wind clawed, flinging sleet sideways. Eli led the horse into a stand of spruce and hacked branches until a hollow formed. "Get in," he ordered. She hesitated. Habit made her wait for permission to exist. "Now, Patsy." Her name in his mouth startled her. She crawled inside. He followed, pulling the horse's reins around a trunk and throwing his coat over them both. They sat shoulder to shoulder, breath mingling in clouds. The noise outside was the roar of a world unmade. "You always live like this?" she asked, shouting over the wind. "Only way I know how. And you like it. It doesn't lie." The answer should have chilled her, but it didn't. Honesty, even hard-edged, felt like warmth compared to the polished cruelty of town. They waited until the storm burned itself out. When they crawled free, the world glittered, every branch iced, every footprint a mirror. Patsy stared, lips parted. "It's beautiful." Eli looked around as if seeing it for the first time through her eyes. "Guess it is." They climbed again until twilight. At last, through trees, she saw smoke curling from a chimney and a shape of wood against snow. A cabin small enough to vanish into the slope if you blinked. The roof sagged, patched with bark. A porch leaned on one good post, yet light glowed behind the shutter like a heartbeat. "Home," Eli said. He swung down, helped her dismount, then pushed the door open. The cabin smelled of pine resin, ashes, and thyme. A stove squatted in the corner, cold but ready. Hooks held a rifle, pelts, a worn coat. A single table, one chair, no woman's touch, not for years. "I'll sleep by the fire," he said, dropping gear. "You take the cot?" "I can sleep on the floor." "You'll take the cot," he repeated. No argument, just fact. He handed her a blanket thick with the scent of smoke and cedar. "Tomorrow, we find your feet. After that, you earn your keep." She nodded, too tired to hide the gratitude rising in her throat. "I'll learn." "I don't doubt it," he said, turning away to strike a match. The fire caught, painting the walls in gold. For the first time since the festival, warmth touched her skin without shame. That night, while Eli mended a trap in silence, Patsy watched sparks climb the flue and wondered what kind of grief drove a man to choose this exile. The mountains loomed beyond the window like sentinels, indifferent but vast. Somewhere beneath their peaks, her old life shrank to rumor, the laughter, the mask, the mud. Here there was only the crack of kindling and a heartbeat steady as a metronome. When Eli finally spoke, it was almost to himself. "Storm'll be worse come winter. You stay, you learn to fight cold, not people. cold don't mock?" She smiled faintly. "That sounds fair." He looked up, the corner of his mouth ghosting toward a grin he didn't finish. "Fair's all the mountain promises." She lay back, the blanket heavy across her chest. Outside, wind scraped the eaves, a lullaby rough but honest. For the first time in years, Patsy closed her eyes without expecting laughter to follow. The next morning she woke to the smell of coffee and elk stew simmering on the stove. Eli was already packing pelts, movements quiet but certain. When she sat up, he glanced over. "You eat, then we work," he said. "Snow's comin' faster than it should." "What kind of work?" "Wood, traps, roof patch. The mountain pays in survival. You earn your share or freeze." Patsy swung her feet to the floor, bones aching yet alive. "Then I'll start today." He nodded, almost approving. "Good answer." Outside, sun climbed slow over ridges of white fire. Patsy stepped into it, breathing the thin, wild air. For the first time since she could remember, no one was watching her crawl. Morning light found its way through the cracks in the shutters, spilling across the cabin's wooden floor like a promise half kept. Frost glazed the corners of the single window. Patsy woke to the soft hiss of the stove and the scrape of steel on wood, Eli sharpening a knife. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply lay there, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of pine smoke and salt, listening to the quiet rhythm of life on the mountain, the pop of embers, the faint drip of melting frost from the roof, the distant cry of a raven cutting through the cold. It was a silence unlike any she'd ever known. Not the heavy silence of a town pretending not to hear cruelty, but a living stillness, patient, vast, and kind. Eli glanced over. "You sleep through an avalanche?" Patsy blinked, still drowsy. "Did one happen?" "Not yet," he said, a small tug at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile. She sat up, brushing stray hay from her hair. "What's first?" "Breakfast, then work." He handed her a tin bowl of stew left from last night. Elk meat, carrots, wild onion. It wasn't pretty, but it was hot and rich and real. The warmth spread through her like courage. When she finished, Eli set an axe in her hands. "Split that pile, 2 cords before noon." Patsy hesitated. "I've never—" "You'll learn." The woodpile outside stood taller than she did. The axe was heavier than it looked, its handle worn smooth from use. Patsy braced her feet, lifted, and swung. The blade buried itself halfway through the log. She grunted, pulled it free, swung again. After a dozen blows, her arms burned and her breath came ragged, but she refused to stop. From the porch, Eli watched without a word. When she paused to wipe sweat from her brow, he said, "You're hitting with your arms. Swing from the hips. Let your body work as one." She tried again. This time, the log split clean in 2. The crack echoed down the slope. "Better," he said. By noon, her palms were raw and blistered, but the pile of split wood stood proud beside the wall. When Eli brought out bread and salted meat for lunch, he didn't comment on her exhaustion. He simply passed her a cup of water and said, "Good work." 2 words, but they filled her chest with something fierce and bright. No applause, no mockery, just acknowledgement. It was all she'd ever wanted. Over the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their life settled into shape. Days were long, but purpose hung in every hour. At dawn, Eli checked his traps. Patsy mended clothes, swept the floor, fed the chickens that roamed near the cabin. When he returned, They skinned the catches together, rabbits, fox, sometimes a deer, if luck favored them. At midday they worked side by side, cutting logs, carrying water, repairing the roof before snow thickened. Eli rarely spoke, but when he did, his words mattered. He showed her how to read the sky for weather, how to find dry moss in the wettest forest, how to follow animal tracks that disappeared under snow. Out here, he said one morning, the mountain doesn't care if you're man or woman, only if you pay attention. Patsy listened. She learned. She grew stronger. Her body changed first. The softness that had once drawn ridicule now carried strength. Her arms thickened. Her steps steadied. When she laughed, it came from her belly, clear and unashamed. Eli noticed, but said nothing. Sometimes, when she was bent over the stove humming, he'd catch himself staring a moment too long. Then he'd turn away, jaw tight, as if the act of feeling were a weakness he couldn't afford. Winter came early. Snow blanketed the valley, swallowing trails and silencing everything but the crack of the axe and the wind's lonely whistle through the pines. Inside the cabin, they found a rhythm of survival and small comforts. Patsy cooked hearty stews that filled the air with herbs and smoke. She mended Eli's shirts by lamplight, fingers pricked and steady. In return, he built her a proper bed frame, carved from cedar, and fixed the door so the cold would stop sneaking in. One night, after a blizzard had trapped them indoors for 2 days, they sat opposite each other by the fire. Eli was carving a spoon from a block of birch. Patsy was darning a wool sock. Without looking up, she said softly, "You were right about the cold. It doesn't mock." He glanced up, surprised at her tone. "But it also doesn't forgive," she added. "If you stop moving, it takes you." Eli nodded. "Same with guilt." She looked into the flames. "You talk like a man who's been frozen by it." "I have." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of unspoken stories, his and hers, both. A week later, she found him outside near the barn, staring at a small wooden cross half buried in snow. "What's that?" she asked quietly. "My wife," he said. "Martha. Buried her here." Patsy's breath caught. "I'm sorry." He nodded, eyes distant. "She died in a storm 7 years back. Child, too. I built that cross the next morning. Never left since." The confession came like a landslide, slow at first, then unstoppable. He told her about the night of the blizzard, about the horse that broke its leg, the walk back too late, the house too quiet. How he'd spent years blaming the wind, then himself. When he finished, the only sound was the groan of trees in the wind. Patsy stepped closer. "You did what you could. The storm wasn't yours to control." He almost laughed. That's what Martha used to say about life. She was right. For the first time, he looked at her fully, not as a stranger he'd rescued, but as someone who understood. The grief between them no longer felt like a wall. It was a bridge made of shared survival. As days passed, the ice between them thinned. Small moments replaced distance. When Patsy burned her hand on the stove, Eli wordlessly bound it in clean cloth. When his shoulder locked from chopping wood, she rubbed salve into the muscle until he could lift his arm again. Sometimes they spoke in stories. Patsy told him about her mother's kitchen back in Ashford Creek, the smell of cinnamon bread before poverty took the warmth away. Eli told her about the first mountain winter he survived alone. how the silence nearly drove him mad until he learned to respect it. One evening, while snow fell soft outside, Patsy dared to tease him. "You talk like the mountain gave birth to you." Eli smirked. "Maybe it did. I've been part of it so long I can't tell where it ends and I start." "Then maybe it was waiting for me," she said, half shy, half bold. "Maybe it needed a little warmth." He looked up, startled by her courage, and smiled. This time, the smile stayed. By late winter, the cabin no longer felt like exile. It felt like home. Patsy had sewn curtains from burlap and stitched tiny flowers into the hems. She painted the window frame blue with leftover dye. She even coaxed Eli into letting her bring 2 orphaned hens inside when the temperature plunged below 0. Eli complained, but when he thought she wasn't looking, he scattered grain for them by the hearth. "You're softening," she teased. He shrugged. "Or losing my mind." "Same thing, maybe." He chuckled, a sound rare and warm enough to make her chest ache. One night, while a gale howled outside, Eli built the fire higher and poured her a mug of his strong, bitter coffee. She sipped and grimaced. "You drink this every day?" "Helps me remember I'm alive." She laughed. "There are easier ways." Eli leaned back, studying her through the glow. "You don't scare easy anymore." "Maybe I never did," she said quietly. "Maybe I just stopped letting them see it." He nodded, thoughtful. "You've got more spine than half the men I've met." "And you," she said, "have more heart than you want to admit." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the fire crackling between them like a heartbeat. Outside, the storm eased. The wind softened into snowflakes that drifted past the window, catching the lamplight like falling stars. Patsy set her cup down and stood. "Good night, Eli." "Good night, Patsy." But when she turned toward her bed, he added, "You did well today. You belong here." She froze. Just 2 simple words, but they carried more kindness than she'd heard in her entire life. She turned, smiling through the sudden blur in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked away, busying himself with the fire. "Don't thank me," he said gruffly. "You earned it." And for the first time since she'd been forced to wear the pig mask, Patsy Whitmore slept without fear. Safe, warm, and certain she had a place in the world again. The thaw came slowly, with days that smelled of damp pine and nights that still bit like wolves. Snowmelt turned the slope into veins of running water, whispering through moss and stone. Patsy loved that sound. It meant survival. By then, her hands were calloused, her cheeks wind-burned, and the cabin carried her presence in every corner. Folded linens by the stove, jars of berries lined neatly on a shelf, a sprig of dried lavender hanging above the window just because she liked the scent. Life had softened around her, but beneath the quiet, Eli carried something restless, like the rumble before a storm. It began with the letter. One evening, Eli returned from the trading post in the valley, his coat dusted with sleet. He dropped a small bundle of supplies on the table, flour, bullets, coffee, and a single folded paper sealed with a red stamp. Patsy reached for it, curious, but his hand closed over it too quickly. "Business," he muttered, stuffing the letter into his vest pocket. She said nothing, but the flicker of guilt on his face stayed with her. For the next few days, he was quieter than usual. He sharpened tools that didn't need sharpening, cleaned the rifle twice in one afternoon, and often stared toward the valley as if listening for something only he could hear. Finally, on the fourth night, she asked, "Who sent that letter?" He hesitated, then sighed. "A marshal, from Helena." Her stomach tightened. "Are you in trouble?" He didn't answer immediately. The fire cracked between them. "I was," he said finally. "Long time ago. They called it murder." He told her then, voice low, eyes fixed on the flames. Years ago, before the mountain claimed him, Eli had worked as a scout for the army. During a border skirmish, his commanding officer ordered him to burn a village accused of harboring raiders. Eli refused. The officer struck him. Eli struck back. In the chaos that followed, the officer fell on his own knife. The army called it mutiny and murder. Eli fled north before the rope could find him. "The marshal says a witness came forward," Eli said. "Says the truth's been found, and I can clear my name, if I come down to face them." Patsy searched his face. "That's good news, isn't it?" Eli shook his head. "I don't trust men who offer freedom in envelopes. Law down there has long memories and short honor." "So what will you do?" "Nothing. Stay put." Patsy frowned. "You've lived half your life with this hanging over you. Don't you want to be free?" "I am free," he said simply. "Up here." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. The mountain had become his prison and his refuge both. He didn't know the difference anymore. 2 weeks later, the past found them anyway. It was near dusk when the first shout echoed through the trees. Men's voices, horses snorting, the clink of metal. Eli's head snapped up. He doused the lantern with a single motion. "Inside," he ordered. Patsy obeyed. Through the crack in the shutters she saw them, 4 riders winding up the trail, rifles slung across their backs. The leader wore a black hat and a badge glinting in the firelight. "Marshal," Eli muttered, loading his gun. "He's brought company." The men dismounted at the porch. The marshal called out, "Eli Stormbreaker, by order of the territory, you're under arrest for the killing of Captain Briggs." Eli stepped into the doorway, rifle in hand. "Captain Briggs killed himself," he said. "You just don't like the kind of man who lives with the truth." "We got the papers, Stormbreaker," the marshal said. "We ain't here to hang you, just to bring you in to sign 'em and stand trial proper." "Trial's just a slower kind of hanging," Eli replied. The standoff hung in the air. Patsy's heart pounded. The marshal's men shifted, restless. "Don't make this hard," one said. "We ain't come to shoot a legend." Eli's eyes flicked to the window. He saw Patsy watching, and lowered the rifle. "You got no call to hurt her," he said. The marshal's gaze followed his. "The woman stays here. You come with us peaceful, she'll be fine." Patsy burst out before she could stop herself. "No, if he goes, I go." The marshal turned, annoyed. "Ma'am, this ain't your affair." "It is," she said, stepping forward, chin lifted. "You think justice means dragging a man out of the life he built just to prove you can?" The marshal hesitated, taken aback by her fire. Eli touched her arm. "Patsy," he said softly, "let me do this." "No," she whispered fiercely. "You ran once because no one stood beside you. You're not running alone again." Something broke in his face then, not weakness, but the brittle pride that had kept him alive. He lowered the gun fully. "All right," he said to the marshal. "I'll come, but she rides with me." The marshal studied them both, then nodded. "Fine, but any tricks, I'll shoot first." They rode down the mountain at dawn. The air was sharp with pine and regret. Patsy rode behind Eli, her arms around his waist. the rhythm of the horse thudding through her bones. Halfway down, the marshal's men halted to water the horses by a stream. Patsy leaned close and whispered, "You could still run." Eli shook his head. "Running turns every sunrise into a chase. I'm tired of that." She pressed her forehead against his back. "Then I'll face it with you." When they reached the valley town, curious faces peered from windows. It wasn't Ashford Creek, but felt no kinder. The marshal led them into the courthouse, a cramped wooden building that smelled of ink and sweat. Inside waited a man in a long coat, gray-bearded, holding a stack of papers. "Judge Morrison," the marshal said. The judge glanced up. "Stormbreaker?" Eli nodded. "You've been cleared," the judge said. "The witness's confession came through last week. Captain Briggs attacked you first. The Army's record's been corrected." The words hung in the room like sunlight through storm clouds. Patsy gasped. Eli didn't move. "You mean it's over?" she whispered. The judge nodded. "You're a free man." Eli looked to the marshal, searching for the trick, the trap, but there was none. Slowly, disbelieving, he signed his name where the judge pointed. When it was done, Patsy touched his arm. "You can go anywhere now," she said. He turned to her, eyes unreadable. "Anywhere?" "Yes." He looked through the courthouse window at the mountains rising blue in the distance. "Then I already know where I'll go." They left town the same day. The marshal tipped his hat as they rode away. "You could have stayed," he said. Eli answered, "Freedom don't mean much in a cage built of streets." Patsy smiled faintly. "Or of memories." He glanced at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, the weight behind his eyes had lifted. The sun dipped low behind the ridges as they started back toward the mountain. Their mountain. But freedom, they soon learned, carried a price, because Ashford Creek had not forgotten, and the Blackwell twins were not done. Rumors traveled faster than mercy. By the time Eli and Patsy reached the foothills, men were already gathering. Men who still thought humiliation was a sport and vengeance a birthright. And high above, the mountain waited, ancient and silent, for the storm that was coming. The mountain wore its spring snow like armor, white, cold, unyielding. Clouds bruised the horizon. Eli and Patsy were halfway up the final ridge when he saw the tracks. 5 horses, heavy with men and purpose, cutting through thawing mud toward the cabin. He crouched, fingers brushing a hoof print still slick with meltwater. "They're close," he said. "Who?" Patsy asked, though she already knew. "Garrett and Gideon, and whoever still thinks cruelty's a kind of sport." The name turned her stomach. She remembered the laughter, the mask, the pit of mud. For months she'd tried to forget their voices, but memory came back sharp as winter. Eli stood, face set. "They want to finish what they started, but they'll find the ground's changed." They reached the clearing near dusk. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney. The intruders were already inside. Horses were tied to the rail, rifles glinting beside saddles. Eli's jaw tightened. He handed Patsy a revolver, its metal cool and heavy in her palm. "You remember what I taught you?" She nodded. "Aim steady. Breathe slow. Don't fire unless it's to end it." "Good." He touched her cheek briefly, rough thumb tracing warmth there. "Stay low. If I fall—" "You won't," she said, cutting him off. "Not while I'm here." They moved like ghosts through the pines. Inside the cabin, voices argued, Garrett's drawl, Gideon's rasp, and a third man's growl. "Stormbreaker'll come back for her," Garrett sneered. "He's the hero type. We'll hang him where everyone can see." "Shut it," Gideon snapped. "Light's moving. He could be watching." He was. Eli stepped into the doorway with the rifle leveled. "Evening, boys," he said. The shock froze them for half a heartbeat. Then guns jerked up. The first shot cracked, splintering the doorframe beside his ear. Eli fired once, clean, precise. Gideon went down, clutching his shoulder, howling. Garrett dove for cover, overturning the table. "You think you can hide forever?" he shouted. "The law ain't on your side." Eli's voice was calm. "Law's here." He gestured toward the woman stepping out from the trees. Patsy. Her dress was dusted with pine needles, her hair loose in the wind. She held the revolver steady. "It's over, Garrett," she said. "The judge already knows what you did. You won't hurt anyone again." Garrett laughed, a jagged, desperate sound. "You think anyone cares about a pig in a mask?" The words struck, but they didn't wound. Not anymore. Patsy's voice was steady as stone. "That pig can shoot." He lunged sideways, bringing his gun up. She fired first. The bullet tore through his arm. The weapon clattered away. He screamed, fell to his knees. For a moment, only the wind answered. Eli crossed the threshold, kicked Garrett's gun aside, and bound his hands with a strip of raw hide. "You had your chance," he said quietly. "You made your choice." The third man, a hired brute, tried to slip out the back, but met the cold mouth of Patsy's revolver. She shook her head once. "Don't!" He froze. Outside, thunder rolled along the ridges like applause from the mountain itself. When the storm broke, they dragged the wounded men down to the marshal's post, 2 valleys over. Judge Morrison rode out 2 days later, saw the evidence, heard the confessions. Garrett and his brother were sentenced to prison. The rest scattered before the ink was dry. The day the verdict was read, Patsy stood on the courthouse steps beside Eli, wind tugging her hair. Townspeople whispered, not cruelly this time, but in awe. One woman pressed a hand to her heart and said, "You're the one they called the pig girl." Patsy met her gaze. Not anymore. She turned to Eli. His eyes held pride and something gentler beneath it. "You saved me twice," he said. "No," she replied. "We saved each other." They rode home under a sky washed clean by rain. The mountain waited, green with new growth. The cabin stood whole, firelight flickering through its window. When they reached the porch, Eli took her hand. "You still want to stay?" he asked. She smiled. "This isn't staying. This is living." He pulled her close, the smell of rain and pine between them, and kissed her, slow, certain, unguarded at last. Above them, lightning faded into stars. The world exhaled, and for the first time in years, both of them believed that redemption wasn't something you prayed for. It was something you built, one act of courage at a time. Spring ripened into summer, and the mountain shed its last veil of snow. Rivers sang louder. The air smelled of pine sap and sun-warmed earth. Life returned to the slopes in colors Patsy had never imagined, green that almost glowed, wildflowers spilling like spilled paint, and blue skies so vast they made her chest ache. In the cabin, laughter became as natural as breath. Eli built her a small garden near the stream, fencing it with logs he split by hand. Patsy planted carrots, cabbage, and a row of daisies just because they made her smile. Every evening they sat on the porch. The dog they'd adopted curled at their feet, watching the light slip behind the peaks. One night, when crickets hummed and the air was sweet with rain, Eli said quietly, "When I found you, I thought I was rescuing someone broken. Turns out, you were the one who saved me." Patsy looked at him. The same man who once hid behind silence and guilt, now open and steady beside her. "We saved each other," she said. "You gave me a place where laughter doesn't hurt." He took her hand. "Then let's keep it that way." Weeks later, word reached them that Ashford Creek had changed. The mayor had resigned in disgrace, the townspeople ashamed of what they'd done. A letter arrived, carried by the same marshal who'd once ridden up the mountain to arrest Eli. It was from the laundry girl, the one who had watched in silence that awful day. She wrote, "You were right. Seeing what they did to you made me leave. I found work in Helena. People are kinder here. Thank you for showing me courage." Patsy read the words aloud, tears glinting. "If even one heart changed," she whispered, "then it was worth it." Eli nodded. That's how the world mends, one choice at a time. By the end of summer, the first golden leaves drifted down. Patsy stood at the doorway, the valley shining below like another lifetime. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. Eli smiled faintly. "Only when it helps me remember how far we've come." She stepped into his arms. The breeze tangled her hair, carrying the scent of smoke and cedar, the music of their new life. Somewhere beyond the trees, a hawk cried. Somewhere below, the town kept turning. But up here, on the ridge they'd chosen together, time moved slower, kinder. Eli rested his chin on her hair. "You're safe here," he murmured. Patsy smiled, eyes closed. "It's home now," she said, "if you'll have me." He kissed her forehead. "Always." The fire crackled, the mountain breathed, and love, quiet, hard-won, and real, stayed. Every time we tell a story like this, we remind ourselves that compassion can rewrite the cruelest tales. Thank you for listening, wherever you are in the world. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe in love that heals instead of harms, stay with us. The next story is waiting just beyond the ridge.